This could potentially overtake us here. This is getting a little scary.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Okay. Yeah, this is...
Okay, y'all need to hurry up here. Like, seriously, we're encased in flames now.
You guys gotta go backwards. No.
Hello, Jody, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you there. I'm telling them you were notching up.
Yeah, this has got to move fucking quick here. Holy crap. Oh, that's alright. This kind of burnt off, so we'll be okay now.
That went across. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Oh yeah, look over there.
We are
You guys got a light now or what? Did you guys get that light? Oh yeah, they're clipping. Whew! That's a meat and a half, eh?
Wow. Yeah. Welcome to the apocalypse. Sorry. Welcome to the shit show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
I'm Richard Basilotto in the bottom right today, all the way from France.
Yes, but France still there with a chance to score something for a corner. And my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome once again. The world, once again, is a flaming mess. That video you saw, by the way, actual video from inside a train's control room as they made their way through the fires. Climate extremes, political absurdity, war threats, economic strain, and the usual crisis chaos. It's hard to tell whether to laugh, panic, or just turn the news off and go live, go live in a cave. But perhaps that's not really your style. Now, so instead, we do what we always do. We take some of the biggest, strangest, and stupidest things happening around the world and try to make sense of them without the corporate glaze. Because somehow, everything is connected. Everything is on fire. And everybody acts surprised. Then we also will get to China, because if you want to understand where business, power, and the future is heading, you can't ignore China. Our guest has spent more than a decade living and working there across sales, marketing, hospitality, luxury brands, Keppel Land, Club Med, the Singapore Tourism Board, and even the Singapore Police Force. He's the mind behind China Decoded, a framework that helps boards and C-suites understand how Chinese companies think, compete, and scale. Can you welcome to the shit show, Kenny Lim?
Hi, everyone. Glad to be on the shit show.
You got the name there.
It's a strange set of words to pass through the lips, right?
You got to give it a bit of an oomph, right?
Yeah. So Kenny, we always like to start with the story, right? So what is your story? You're known as the China Whisperer. What's your story?
Well, I have between me and my family, we have a combined something like 80 years of experience and exposure to China. So my father went to China back in 1997, right? So he's been there now 30 over years to set up a food processing plant. So my exposure to China started when I was actually a very young adult or even a teenager, right? My younger brother, after his graduation, went to China as well to teach architectural design. So the both of them have been there now for 30 plus years, each of them. And then my brother got married to a Chinese woman. So his family is in China right now. Right. So then I also started visiting China quite very early 2000s, right? Because of work. And then in 2011, when I was working for Club Med, I was sent to Shanghai to head up the Greater China Business Unit sales. And then I lived in China for 10 years, right? So 5 years in Shanghai and then another 5 years in Zhuhai and Shenzhen. And during which time I traveled quite extensively because Club Med sold its packages or its product through travel agencies. So the distribution is very wide. And I was visiting, I had to sit down and write down the number of the cities that I've been to, and then it ended up being 34 cities, right, in 10 years' time. So that's actually how I started my relationship with China. And I remember when I was first sent there, my thoughts were, right, I'm going to China to teach, to enlighten my colleagues, right? So I remember very clearly a state of mind that's very different before I went, and then during the time I was there, and then after I returned in Singapore in 2020. I actually feel and remember this evolution very clearly, how I understood China. And I noticed very clearly that change, right, of the journey that I've come to. I used to be a little bit, maybe very arrogant and somewhat prejudiced against the Chinese people and what they are versus what I am now. Well, I mean, this is something that I've lived through myself, and I felt that it's important that more people understand China better, right? Because of its growing importance, and it'd be dangerous. And we can see this happening, right? I mean, I look at how our government is dealing with China, how the world is dealing with China, and there's just too much misunderstanding, too much lack of context, lack of knowledge about their history, lack of knowledge about where they're coming from, right? And I think it's very dangerous. Right? That's why we are in the state we are in today.
Yeah, I'm hearing the I'm hearing the transformational story as well. Like even in your family, the way your family went back, the sense that I get is that okay, they were going back for a short time, they ended up staying for a lifetime. You're calling yourself the China Whisperer. You've kind of explained where that comes from. So when you think about it day to day, I'm sure things get you mad, frustrated from time to time as well, right? So when people are speaking about China, what is the most frustrating thing that you hear?
That they are just coming from a very misguided place, right? And well, most people are like this, are very judgmental, and they always comment on things, right, in the form of a judgment, right? So when we say, "Oh, something happened in China," and then there's always that frame of mind. I mean, we look at everything. We look at everything in the world through lenses, right? That's just the reality of human nature. From the understanding that we have and the context that we understand, we look at things through lenses. So what I realize is that a lot of this, if you do not have enough light on the other side of the lens, you very often see your own projection, right, on the screen. And I see that happening a lot, right? So why do people feel that China wants to take over the world? Why does China that China is going to be bad, right, when it becomes very powerful? And I think this is all projection, right? And again, like I said, it's frustrating because it makes people make the wrong decisions. Even in my work, right, when I deal with corporate clients, if they don't understand their competitors, and increasingly, for example, their stakeholders, their suppliers, their customers, and increasingly their owners. So Chinese companies are acquiring stakes actually in a lot of global businesses. So they actually have Chinese owners that they do not understand. And then they make the wrong judgment. They project their own assumptions, and then make the wrong decisions. Right? So this is something that's totally avoidable, and all they need is a little bit of knowledge and context.
Yeah, and I mean, perhaps part of the problem also is that it is as large of a place as it is quite closed. I mean, they do keep things quite close to the chest as well, right? They're not actually just saying come this is exactly how we are. This is our play. This is our way of doing things. They just do it, and they don't seem to spend very much time on talking about how they do it. Um, and I wonder about this because you're talking about how people project certain things, because all we get to see sometimes is things like the way something happens in Hong Kong, or as they talk about Taiwan. What do you think, and how do you think that people can begin to get a sense of it? Because what I'm hearing is, it's like people see one aspect of China and they think that's the way all of China works, as in there's a way in which a certain aspect of life is treated, in terms of perhaps politics, in terms of views, and people think that might be how business works as well. Is there a really big difference between politics and business in China?
I think there is some difference, right? But the mindset is mindset. So I talk about, well, I call myself the mindset expert, because I truly, I like to look at behavior and how it was driven, right? The things that drive behaviors. And I think China has a very unique mindset. You can say every nation or every people have a certain mindset, but I think mindset exists in China in a very unique way, in that it has one of the longest, of course, history of a civilization. And very importantly, this history of its civilization is taught to its people very consistently, right? And then add to that, right, the fact that its modern history, the last, maybe from 1830s, right, from the century of humiliation onwards until the founding of the modern China. Now, this history is actually still living memory in the Chinese people. So it actually affects, their worldview and their values very consistently across the entire people, right? So, I mean, I personally find mindset within the Chinese people to be very consistent, even though it's a very vast and big country, and then it's of course many different regions with its own subcultures, but the common understanding of their history is actually very consistent. And also because the history is very vivid, right? I mean, and because it's such a powerful history, the trauma that they have went through, things that they have gone through, is actually not so long ago, right? What happened in World War II, right? People remember World War II. Of course, there's still maybe not many survivors left, but we still have people who listened to the first-hand stories of survivors of World War II, right? They are actually still surviving. So this is living memory, right? And in all of the world, I think very few countries went through during that era the kind of experiences that China had, right? How different countries came in and divided it, did whatever they wanted to it. On their own soil, they were dictated to. Land was given away. So these are all very, very fresh, right? And I mean, I teach this actually in the lecture part of my corporate workshops. I share the history of modern China. And to date, the Chinese people very consciously hold on to this memory. It is in the national anthem that they sing every day, right? It is, in, of course, their history books. They have kept, for example, the old summer palace, the ruins of the old summer palace, standing as it is, as ruins, right? The old summer palace in Beijing is 540 football fields big. And then they've kept it, undeveloped, right, as it is. And make it a point, right, that, for example, all the primary school children in Beijing will make one trip in their life, an official one, to the old summer palace to get in touch with that history, right? And the old summer palace, in case people don't know, used to be like, I mean, it was regarded and documented as the most beautiful park or garden the world has ever seen, right? And it was a collection of all of the Chinese multiple dynasties cultural artifacts, arts, plants, their wealth, right, as a people. And it was burned down at the end of the Second Opium War by 4,000 French and English troops over 3 days, right? They just razed it and then looted the place and brought all the artifacts out of China, and they now exist in Europe, maybe. And yes, the Chinese people remember it because they are taught it. Yeah. So it's living memory, right? And because of that, this mindset, the views, the world views, and the values that they have, I found to have remained very consistent and quite vivid, right, inside their psyche. Right?
Yeah.
So interesting.
Anybody else has got something you want to?
I love the history side of it. But you mentioned something at the beginning, because it was something I obviously noticed when I first came to Singapore back in 2003. Was this? I don't like to use the word, but this arrogance of Singaporeans towards Chinese, which I think has changed a lot. I remember being in a taxi once, and a Chinese guy was riding a bike. I didn't know which country he was from, but the taxi driver was like, Chinaman, because only a Chinaman would ride a bike, right? So I found that really interesting, how I think, if you think about me being in Singapore since 2003, it's like being in China since 2003. The change has been so fundamental. It's so massive. But the other thing that I find really interesting for Singaporeans is, do you remember the TikTok CEO was being interviewed by the US Congress, and they kept referring him to being from China, and he's like, no, I'm Singaporean. No, I served my nation. And they say, yeah, but but they kept insisting about, no, but you're from China. I'm just, how do you guys react when that happens? I kind of find it a curiosity.
I didn't think it said anything about Singaporeans.
No. It says about Americans, right? Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have to say, right? I mean, I would say most Singaporeans are quite proud of how he handled himself, right? And the Chinese actually were also very interestingly quite amused at that whole debacle. And I've seen online, right, as well as heard from friends of how they are also proud, right, that there is a person like this representing them actually in the US. So yeah, I mean, I find the Chinese very practical in how they look at everything, right? So they're not offended sometimes when they should be. They are not hurt, or they are not annoyed when they should be, or even if they are, it dies down quite quickly. Right? The Chinese are some of the most practical people I've come across. But it's also very interesting. You mentioned that, right? I used to be very arrogant as well, I feel, right? So I also had my prejudices against China people, and then today I look at myself at the time and realized that I was immature and didn't know enough, right? So the fact of the matter is that most of us in Singapore, especially from 15 years ago or 20 years ago, saw people or Chinese people from places in China that were very, very backward. And it was a result of very intentional policies from the Singapore government. Right, the Singapore government was trying to attract people to come to Singapore to make up the Chinese population, right? Because that was a plan. They cannot attract people from the first tier cities, right, in Shanghai and Beijing, to make Singapore a new home. So the only way they can have some kind of a result at scale was to go to the third tier cities, right, where Singapore, the first tier city, is attractive to them as a way of life. Right, so the people who came here at that time were from very rural, very not developed towns and cities, and of course, together with that, the behavior that came along with those that stage of civilization, right? So it created a very misguided or distorted view of what Chinese people are, right? So the fact is, China is huge, right? Is 1.4 billion people, 55 ethnicities, and then we see a certain representation of it. And then Joe is absolutely right? Because especially with people from small countries like Singapore, right? We think of a country's name and then we attach it to everyone because that's who we are in Singapore, right? Somebody from Ang Mo Kio is no different from somebody from Toa Payoh, right? But in China, it's entirely different, right? It's like saying the British are the same as the French, or yeah, I mean it's really that, right?
Just a couple of questions or comments there, Joe, if you want to address them.
Okay, so Gamjan, and what China is also lacking, sharing its culture as it deserves. Japan has anime, Korea has K-pop. What about China? I don't know. What do you think? I think China is sharing a kind of culture around the world. It seems to take the form of robots and cars right now.
Yeah, and air conditioners.
And air conditioners, yeah. Now, I want to talk more about. I want to get back to this thing about the story that drives China internally, because we were taught the history of China as well. So the same things did happen in history, but I noticed the labeling is a little bit different. And in our conversations and in the posts I've seen as well, the term the humiliation,
Century of humiliation.
Yeah. So that's something that I think is it's kind of a superpower that's been installed into the Chinese people as well, and it's almost that built-in desire. We have to make this right. We have to do something. It's a driving force. It leaves a hole that needs to be fixed. Because I don't remember when I was learning about it being seen. It wasn't framed the same way. The story wasn't put that way. It was a defeat. That's it. But the language I hear when it's described from a Chinese perspective is the humiliation, right? So how much of that do you think plays into the way China reacts to the world?
It is a very important part of how they behave now, right? And I suspect, right, Joe, that your knowledge and memory of the century of humiliation is but the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I talk about it now, right? So I spent months researching and consolidating the information for my materials, and even as the China guy that I was in 5 years ago, I was learning so much more, right? When I intentionally dig, right? So the century of humiliation is so much more than the burning of the Summer Palace or the Japanese invasion, right? It started in 1839 with the First Opium War, and then there's been so many little skirmishes and insults and humiliations that different countries were doing to China. So in my course, when I describe the century of humiliation, the material takes a full 35 minutes for me to go through. This is a 50-slide segment, right? And the audience is usually riveted, right? Because it's storytelling of things that everybody can relate to, right? When you have a trade, when you are doing trade with the British, because they were buying so much tea and porcelain and silk, but they had nothing to sell to China, right? And then decided, heck, we will sell opium, right? And then of course the Chinese resisted it, and then they tried to put a stop to it, and then it was framed as an act of war, and then the British sent their more advanced steam-powered ships, and this happened in 1839, So and then they came in and they attacked China, forced it to allow opium sale, forced it to sell to allow the import of opium into more ports than just Canton at that time, and then forced it to accept the fact that all foreigners can move freely in the country and not be subject to Chinese laws. I mean, things like this, right? So this went on for a very long time. So when the British did it, and then suddenly a lot of other countries realized that China was so weak that they could have the same thing. Oh yeah, and after they attacked China and forced all those concessions, China had to pay reparations, had to pay indemnity, right, to British for all the trouble they took. And then all the other countries started to do the same, right, because they could, right? So today, when we look at China and its behavior, the fact, for example, that they built up their military, in this context, we can totally understand why they feel this is necessary, right? Because the Chinese, I think more than any other people in the world, understand the law of the jungle, right? And if you are weak, you have no one to blame but yourself when people come for you. You deserve to be bullied, right? So that's actually a very core thing, a very core theme in their culture at the moment, right? That they must never be weak again, right? So with the military built up and all that, right? People like I don't know, the Japanese finds it threatening, the Filipinos find it threatening, but I think it's the framing that they have chosen, right, to take. But the Chinese have always been very clear that they are building themselves so that they will never be weak again, never be so weak that people can do whatever they want to it. Because they learned the law of the jungle earlier and in more dramatic, more traumatic ways than any other civilization on Earth. They were nearly wiped out. I mean, exterminated as a people. That is actually in their psyche, right? The Japanese invasion that they went through for 14 years was truly a time when they understand it now to be a time when another people were trying to exterminate them. Right? I was sharing this with Andrea the other day, right? Over a conversation. I said, every time the Japanese invaded or started bombing a Chinese city, and they did this over 14 years, every time they started with a city, one of the first targets the Japanese went after is the universities. The Japanese bombed Chinese universities as one of the first targets. It is a very clear sign that they are trying to destroy the knowledge, the passing of knowledge, the culture, and young people, because they wanted to subjugate the people into becoming Japanese, like they did with the Taiwanese when they colonized it. So the Chinese remember that time, right? The century of humiliation with its many, right? And we're talking about, of course, in early 1910s with the 8-nation alliance, the 八国联军. We're talking about 8 nations that banded together to basically conquer, to carve up China, right? So we're talking about a great many powers. So it's not just the Americans of today. France was involved, Russia was involved, Austria-Hungary was involved, right? So there were a lot of foreign powers, right, wanting a piece of China, right? And they were not in a position to do anything about it. They were basically stripped, raped, and then made to pay to compensate the trouble that the foreigners take. So they remember that time very vividly. They will never they very rarely chat about it in conversations especially with foreigners. But yeah, that's why it's dangerous, right? When I see people make comments about Japan, make comments about Taiwan, very insensitively, right? The worst thing you can say to a Chinese is, so what's the big deal with Japan? Can't you forgive them, right? So they may not have an argument with you, but for sure, mentally, they're gonna think to themselves, you don't know anything, right? It's hard to be a friend with you, right?
Mm.
That's just the reality now. But yeah, I mean, for everyone listening in, right? I urge, when you have the time, just Google it, right? Or ChatGPT it. Century of Humiliation. It is a very important part of the Chinese modern history that still lives in their living memory, and it affects how they look at a lot of things.
But they also do take responsibility as well, right? It's not about blaming everybody else. They also take responsibility for getting to a weak state.
This is what I find the most amazing, actually, about the Chinese. You know, I mean, for all the trauma and the sufferings that they have gone through, they remain very introspective, actually, right? So they interpret this as we were weak, and we must never be weak again. They accept that the law of the jungle is a reality, law of the world, right? And they focus on building themselves strong, right? They of course they will protest when the Japanese do something insensitive, or the Japanese continue, for example, to worship, right? They go to the shrine and they worship the very same people who were leading the entire invasion. So that, of course, offends the Chinese, but they continue to visit Japan as tourists. They continue to visit, all these other countries. In fact, for a very long time after World War II, the Chinese saw all these countries more advanced, more developed, more sophisticated, as countries that they have to learn from, right? And worshipped these countries or their culture for a very long period of time, right? But of course, with history and its evolution, a few other things that turned out to be milestones adjusted their mindset. So, for example, I talk about this quite extensively as well. So the great financial crisis in 2008, the global financial crisis, actually made a very big difference to how the Chinese saw the world, right? So prior to that, they worshipped the West, the institutions that the West had. They were learning the financial systems. They were learning social civic systems. It seemed to have a lot of freedom. Everybody seemed to be happy. So they were trying to learn as much as they could. But 2008, right, with the financial crisis, the Chinese realized that actually the West don't know what they are doing, right? The banks were giving out rubbish loans, the subprime crisis, and then they came to China for help. They came to China for a bailout, right, to buy treasury bonds, to invest, and it's very interesting. So that happened in 2008. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative was announced in 2014. So 2008, in my eyes, shifted the Chinese confidence in their own path. So they realized that the West is not this golden destination that we will all ultimately get to, right? Because they also screw up, right? And they decided that they had to find their own path. And then it took, of course, 6 years for Xi Jinping to come up with this idea, right? Something that China will lead globally. His idea of the Silk Road, right, in modern terms. And then another very interesting thing happened as well in 2016, I think. It was the Rio Olympics. There was this diver, right, He Zi, and then her boyfriend, Qin Kai. So Qin Kai, He Zi just won the silver medal in a diving event. And at the award ceremony, her boyfriend, Qin Kai, in front of global audience, right, global media, proposed to her. I remember very clearly because I was already in China at the time. I was sent to China in 2011, and I saw this on TV in 2016. And I actually went to search, right? Who has anyone done something like this before? 30-year-old young man decides his proposal worthy of global attention and making it at an award ceremony at the Olympics, no less. Right? And I thought it was at that time, I thought it was pretty audacious, right? This the confidence that this young guy had. And I use this now as an analogy, as example, right, of the coming of age of Chinese confidence. And then you can see how it has evolved, right? Today, we have global business leaders, the people leading BYD and Shein and ByteDance and Huawei. I mean, they are from their 40s, in their 40s and their 50s. And they are fearless in how they are attacking global markets. Fearless, right? If you look at what they're doing, putting the kind of the kind of capex, the kind of the plans that they have in such a short period of time. It takes courage for a business leader to do things like that, to be able to scale the way they do.
And perhaps great faith in the ability of the team as well.
Yeah,
it's always something when you go like I can put together a plan and these people can execute. Let's go through the. I know this normally is a full day course and a bit more for you,
2 days,
but we'd like to get a taste of the framework that you have to understand China more meaningfully. I feel like we've been already on that
seeing
journey,
a little bit of it, yes.
Yeah.
So I have a 6-pillar framework I call PRISMS, right, for its letters, PRISMS, right. I've done a lot of thinking and studying about of this over the last year, 2 years or so, and I came up with this, right. I say we can actually understand the Chinese mindset if we looked at how they understood or how they treated first pragmatism, and then their attitudes towards reliances, which is my word for self-sufficiency, and then idle factories, the way they look at idle assets, or how they deal with assets, and then speed, and then metal, as in their resilience, right, and then scale. So PRISMS, right. So they each mean a very different but very important part of the mindset that the Chinese have. So if you ask me, one of my favorite things to talk about is actually idle factory, right? I don't know if Joe should have felt it, right? So have Andrea. In the last few years, we've seen the invasion of Chinese F&B brands into Singapore, right? And they seem to be doing so much better and doing so many things that our local F&B have not been able to do in all its history. And one of the things that I've always been very fascinated by is the kind of mechanics, the kind of promotions that the Chinese brands make or do in the market. And I realize it's because they look at things, in what I call the idle factory. The Chinese cannot accept that they have a factory laying idle. So before COVID, before the Chinese brands came in big time, a lot of our Chinese restaurants have very busy lunch times and then very busy dinner times. And then the time between 2 to 5 p.m. tend to be very quiet times. And traditionally, Chinese restaurants would close, right? The restaurants here in Singapore would close during those hours because they didn't have to pay their hourly wage waiters and waitresses, thinking that they're saving money. But the Chinese, after they came, saw this very differently. 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. became the time when they rolled out the most aggressive promotions. You will have your 1-on-1, your 1-for-1, your kids eat free, all kinds of freebies, And that's because they saw the entire clock, right? 24 hours in which they are paying rental. And then they're looking every hour that is not generating income to be money lost. So they're not really saving money when they close 2 to 5. They are actually losing money when they close 2 to 5. Right. So and you can now observe this idle factory in nearly all aspects of retail and business models from in China and from China when they come out to foreign markets. So it evolves into many different forms, right? But yeah, that's actually one thing that I spend a lot of time on actually with corporate clients to understand and then to identify the assets that they have. And this came from, again, part of the history that China had, right? So in 2001, after it entered WTO, the foreign companies, of course, all went to China looking for cheap factories. And you know how even till now, right? Maybe not so much now, but for a very long period of time, the biggest Western companies did procurement in China by not asking for quotes. They did not go to the market and say, hey, we need to produce this. And then we invite 3 suppliers, right? 3 manufacturers to give us their best price. No, the biggest companies with the clout that they have went into the market, specified very clearly how much they wanted to pay, the quality that they wanted, all the delivery terms and whatnot, right? And then asked who's willing to do it. Now, this is a very important distinction from what we just talked when we asked for a quote. Asking for a quote and going to the market and saying who's willing to do it is entirely different, right? So of course, when they entered China during that time, China was already in a time when there were a lot of excess capacity because they were building a lot of township enterprises that had no orders. So the Chinese entrepreneurs were all struggling to find business, to find orders that can fill up their capacity. So they were hungrier than any other place the Western companies have ever been to. So they were able to do that. And somebody in China will always say yes, right? So if you went to China at that time and say, look, I want to produce 1 million pieces of this. It has to be delivered 1 week later. Any day late, there's going to be penalties. And it has to be a certain level of, quality and whatnot. Somebody in China will say yes. They will find a way, right? And that lasted a very, very long time. And that's how, and I studied this as well, right? The corporate profits from the Western companies, the US companies were able to squeeze out of their operations in China, grew phenomenally during those years, during 2 decades. Net corporate profit for corporate America grew 50% in something like 13 years. Net profit. That's how the Americans got very rich during that time in the early 2000s for 13 years. And this idle factory then somehow got built into Chinese operations, right? So they are always eager to take an order and then find ways to meet the requirements, because otherwise they starve, right? Or they have no business. So that went on for quite a while, and I think this got ingrained into their business operating system as well. So this is something that I talk about. I'm very fascinated by, because it can emerge in any number of forms. I can see it in business models in F&B, in car wash, in membership, in real estate. So spotting the asset that is laying idle has become a superpower of the Chinese business person. And then thinking of ways to make it work, right? In ways, in creative ways. It's really a Chinese superpower.
I don't know if you guys remember just a few weeks ago, there was a story, one of the coffee companies here. Is Costa Coffee Chinese?
Yes.
It's one of the,
Yes.
And so basically the Singapore business model is different to the region. They come to Singapore not to make money, but to build credibility, and then they expand across Asia. So they look at Singapore as a marketing rather than a business opportunity. And then, which obviously makes it harder for other coffee companies to compete because they're all looking to make profit. But I just thought it was a really interesting example of how they go about things differently, and every country in the region has a sort of a different role to play as far as China is concerned.
I'm actually very worried for enterprises in Singapore, right? Because we have to think bigger. We have come to a time now where, to be very honest, right, if it was a free market, entirely free market, the Chinese will treat Singapore as you know what Andre just mentioned. This is really just a stepping stone, because it's such a small market. They actually don't need to make money here. The biggest value from out of Singapore is its cosmopolitan global positioning. So if they say, oh, we have a branch in Singapore, they can actually say they have globalized, right? So that's something that the Chinese have been actively doing, right? So they bring their operations to Singapore, and you are absolutely right. They don't necessarily have profitability or even breaking even as an objective, because they see a lot of other value out of this. Now, as a result, how are we going to compete, right? The local operators. So I've come to the conclusion now. I think the solution is in a few things. First of all, Chinese businesses or Singapore businesses cannot think about Singapore only now as a market. Our world now has become global. The moment we start, we have to be thinking about scale. So I would even advise, for example, my clients to start considering Malaysia and Indonesia, or the cities in Malaysia, Johor Bahru and Kuala Lumpur and then Jakarta, as part of our initial launch plan. So you don't even necessarily have to open your first outlet in Singapore. You can do so in Johor Bahru if you want to prove concept, right? So that's something that I talk about. So we have to go at least regional, because otherwise we have no firepower to play against the people who are coming here and using Singapore only as a stepping stone. And then second, I think legislation is, to some extent, is necessary. But I think our government is very slow to act in this kind of things, right? Because it's not as socialist as it should be. But I feel that it's necessary, right? Actually, the Chinese do this very, very actively, right? So for example, the Chinese believe that reading is a very important habit to maintain among its people. And it is actually in local laws that when a shopping mall is opened, that the shopping mall must have certain mix of different things, including a bookshop. Just to give an example. So when there is legislation like this, what does it do, right? It mandates the developer to find a bookstore operator, and then he cannot be asking sky-high prices for rent, because this is a mandate. The guy has to be in here. He's actually doing you a favor, right? So and I think that's necessary, actually, right? So I mean, just like Lee Kuan Yew's administration, engineered our social composition, I think it is necessary as well, right, in our economy to have some kind of, first of all, a very clear idea what's necessary for the nation, for the good of the nation, and then to pay the price for it. That's another,
Yeah. I think the Singapore version of what you're talking about is the food court. It seems to be the compulsory in every building.
our government is actually comfortable doing things like this, right? But so far it's been limited to maybe just a few things, right? Just like, for example, food. Of course, it's a basic necessity, but beyond that, right, there's actually so much more to the well-being of a people. How we look at whether we protect local businesses, whether we protect knowledge, right? Do we still have bookshops, right? And that's the thing. You see, today I feel the modern world has come to a point now where rental is actually the key word in how our community and how our society evolves. It comes down to that, right? To rental. So whether we have a nice restaurant in our neighborhood, or a nice bookstore, or a nice mom and pop store, or whatever, I mean, it affects lifestyle in that community, right? But well, no one is in charge of this, but I think that this is necessary, right? I feel that it's a solution lies somewhere there.
I'm not sure if I'm lightening the mood right now as we go to this, but this looks-maxing that's been big, and then we heard recently of balls-maxing, which I hope is not related at all to what I'm going to ask you about right now, which is China-maxing. So apparently that's a thing. And
it is a
what
big
does it
thing.
mean?
Maxing is the internet slang for maximizing something, right? To go all in, right? So this happened it's very interesting. I find this, fascinating and moving to some extent. I want to tell you this story. So this happened actually, you guys remember January last year, 2025, when Trump wanted to ban TikTok. You should remember this.
No.
Do you know what happened when Trump wanted to ban TikTok? They gave the reason that there is national security risk. There is data. The Chinese can take your data, right, and do weird things with it. And then the American youth who were using TikTok started to protest against this, because they were starting to ask, right, what the hell, right? Facebook takes our data. You take our data. The government takes our data. What the hell is the big deal with the Chinese taking our data, right? So they, in an act of protest, they migrated to this other app called Red Note, 小红书, right? And then it was so interesting, because when they all went to 小红书, and 小红书was predominantly a Chinese community, of course, only Chinese users, the Chinese were surprised by the number of Americans coming to their platform, their everyday life. And then there was this very interesting phrase that surfaced. They started saying, "Oh, it feels like our letters, our Lihua letters, have finally gotten a response." And there's a backstory to this. So all of you know about the Gaokao. The Gaokao is the Chinese examination equivalent to our A levels, right? Or yes, the examination that determines which university you go to, the Gaokao. So the very last question of every Gaokao from the year 1995 was always a question that tested the Chinese command of the English language. And it always asked the examination taker to write a letter to a foreign friend as a Chinese person, Li Hua. So 13 million Chinese youth take the Gaokao every year. From 1995 all the way to 2025. That's like, I did the sums before. It's close to 250 million such letters, people who attempted this question. So every Chinese youth who have taken an exam to go to a university has answered this question before, writing a letter as Li Hua to a foreign friend, to a foreign pen pal, right? So when the Americans suddenly came, and this foreign friend was always American, right? Not the French or not the English, is American, right? And then when the Americans came, the Chinese started. Well, nobody knows who exactly was the first person to say it, but this person said, "Wow, I feel like my Li Hua letters have finally gotten a reply." And it was a very moving thing. Then people started to share their Li Hua letters, right? So all the letters that they have written, and you can imagine, right? The Chinese youth, 16, 17 years old, practicing for the Gaokao. So I talked about 250 million people who have taken the exams, but each of them have practiced answering this question or versions of this question. I don't know, hundreds of times, right? That's how they prepare for the Gaokao. So we're talking about billions of Li Hua letters addressed to foreign friends. And the Americans themselves got moved, right? And yeah, I mean, when you have the time, go on YouTube and search Li Hua letters. You will find a lot of Americans posting and crying and being moved, right? Because there they were saying, right? They say, and here we are, our media demonizing, telling us how bad, the Chinese people are, how they hated us and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized, we all realize that they have always been friendly, telling us about their day, telling us about their country, about their lives. And then they started to write back. So then there was this emotional and personal connection established, right? And then people started, of course, sharing, tips of life, right? So the Chinese, this is a very Chinese thing to do, right? They say, so how is your day? How is your health? Right? Then Americans started to come online to say, oh, I've stopped drinking ice water, right? I drink warm water now at every meal, right? I'm drinking tea. I'm using a thermal flask now to keep my water warm, right? I'm wearing I'm not wearing shoes at home anymore, right? So there's all these things, and then I don't know when it started, but the term Chinamaxxing also started from some of these key influencers. So they'll come on to show off just how much of these Chinese habits or lifestyles that they are taking. Of course, the fact remains, the reality is that a lot of this advice from the Chinese are actually good things. So the Americans started to realize, yeah, these are good things, right? It's good for them. It's good for their health. They started feeling a difference. They stopped drinking ice water. They are drinking warm water now, and they started feeling a difference, and they share it. And then I think it was Forbes or Fortune magazine, I don't remember. Forbes or Fortune magazine, in an article, actually not so long ago, I think it was April this year, just a few months ago, actually talked about Chinamaxxing. Right? This term appeared in an official article, and then it became a thing. It became an official thing. And it's, right, I mean, I also just realized what I'm doing now is actually the same, right? I'm saying that the Chinese mindset with the 6 pillars in the framework can be learned, and then it can be applied to corporate practices or corporate behavior outside of China. So I'm talking about corporate Chinamaxxing.
I'm just we're coming out on the hour right now, so I just want to change gears a little bit right now. So when I look at myself and how I look at life and how I look at my values, I think even though I'm someone from Singapore, from the region, if I think about who I sort of am deep down, I'm almost American, right? In terms of the way I look at values and heroism and stuff like that. So I'm wondering now, from your perspective as well, because I mean, you're Singaporean, but are you Chinese in the way you look at yourself in terms of a mindset, right? I mean, are we, despite the fact that we are not actually part of China, are we just Chinese?
I mean, of course, we are Chinese Singaporeans, right? I see myself as Singaporean first and foremost, but ethnically I am Chinese. and then also because of my personal experiences, I know China in a way that's different from the average Singaporean. I mean, I do see myself as Chinese as well as a Singaporean, right? But yeah, I mean, if you ask me, right, if can I live in China, can I retire in China, and I don't have any issue with that. I don't have any problems with it. In fact, I recommend it to quite a number of my friends. My friends, actually, well, a very good friend of mine, I don't know whether he's online, Kok Hao, actively planning to retire in China. Right?
Yeah, some people have described it as the JB of, it's an international scale. It's the JB for Singapore, right? Another JB.
It's actually, yeah, I mean, it's a very comfortable place to be in. And then, I mean, the reason we feel comfortable with it, of course, can't get away from the fact that, yeah, maybe there is that ethnic connection, right? I mean, the fact that we are Chinese means that we find it very comfortable there. But then increasingly, we are seeing now more and more people from different nationalities finding it very comfortable in China.
I just want to add, because there was a bit of conversation around China doesn't have a story, right? And I find it really interesting. You know, I think it was Kokau who sort of said, Damjan. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. What is China known for? You know, and which I find really interesting. Okay, so I've just got a bit of a list if anyone's got anything to add. So obviously the Chinese horoscope, which is now truly global, design, calligraphy, and writing. So there's contentions where the history of writing, Assyrians, Chinese, but more recently it's pushing towards China. It's ancient stories. So growing up in Australia, we grew up with monkey, Tripitaka, dragons, which is of course one of my favorite things. Everything it's doing with green technology, like everything it's doing with green technology and drones and robots. Fireworks, that was a China invention, right? Pandas, obviously. Now this might be wrong, it could be Japan. Gunpowder.
Gunpowder is China.
I think it's
right.
China,
yeah. Silk and design. The elements, the earth, air, wind, fire, and it was interesting because steel was one of your acronyms. Feng Shui, and it's incredible, grand history, you know. So, and by the way, Joe, you could never be American because you're far too cynical. But anyway, has anyone got any other ones that they would add to that list? I think China's incredible what it's got to offer. I think it's grown explosively through the cheap sort of product path in the last sort of 20, 30, 40 years. But I think there's so much more to China.
Well, one thing that's well worth remembering is that China is the source of the Silk Road.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah, Silk Road.
The prosperity of Venice in Europe from China.
Yeah.
And you know, this is Kenny's quite right in talking in the beginning about, you know, this 100 years of shame in the way of what that is. I remember I'm born in Hong Kong, grew up in Hong Kong as a child. We learned about, you know, the Chinese flag, the Hong Kong flag, and there's a Chinese guy and English guy and boxes on the shore, on the side of a harbor. And, you know, those were opium. That was our education. You know, you as a child, don't forget it.
Yeah.
This is our weakness and this is our shame. And that's something that I grew up with in that way. And then, of course, you know, my parents lived through the Japanese as they went through China in that way. And it's a mixed thing. You know, my father grew up in in Qingdao, which is both a German and then afterwards a Japanese colony. And there is both sort of anger and admiration. Admiration at the incredible discipline, and that passes on as an incredible discipline as contrast against the rule of the Chinese at the time, the strength of the Chinese at the time. And again, echoing what he says about the waste, you know, my mum saw everything as something you can use. It doesn't matter what it is. Saw everything as something we can use, and we
As
use.
idle factory.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting connection.
We never had a waste problem.
So if I can bring us back into something that I've been thinking about, this is the environment. We talk about it on the show many times, and if you look at who's leading the world right now, in green technology, it's China. What are you seeing inside of China? I know this is outside necessarily of your area of expertise, but the thought that occurred to me is China more interested in the business of green technology than it is in actually the environment? Or what is it doing? What have you seen in China that says otherwise or adds to that story?
From my eyes, right, I actually see China as one of the few countries in the world where it is not all about the commercial value. Right. So China actually wants, because it recognizes the reality, right, that if you do not have a healthy environment, you can't lead a good life. So I don't know. I mean, if you guys have ever come across China has this thing called the centenary plan, right? The 100-year plan. So the second 100-year plan, which is from now for this century, actually has environment as one of its key goals. So they talk about let me see. So yeah, there is this pillar out of a total of 5. There is one called ecological pillar, right? So to the Chinese, it is actually a very core part of their path ahead. They recognize the fact that pollution will not bring about a good quality of life. An environment without nature, not in balance with nature, would not bring about good quality of life. And they have very specific targets, right? So they have things like green, low carbon, carbon neutrality by a specific year, non-fossil energy, less than a certain percentage by specific year. So they are actually the only country I feel that is seriously addressing a lot of these issues with very specific numbers. Maybe the difference is that, I don't know, these numbers, when it comes from the Chinese, I tend to think they will meet them. But I don't know which other country now has specific numbers attached to specific time frame for themselves. So that's one thing. And then second, do we believe it, right? Once you have those numbers, do we believe they will meet it? So if you ask me, right, well, the Chinese have it as a measurable KPI, and I believe they will meet it. So I mean, in that sense, maybe they are more, in a position that's more serious.
I really agree with what Kenny is saying in there. I remember, I've gone which year it was, but with regards to these sort of limits and stuff, there was a year before COVID. I think Richard and I were still working along, and it hit its emission limit, and it started shutting factories. Now, nowhere, no other country would do that. And if you think about Europe and what it does, and sort of forget about America, because Europe is the climate moralist of the world in that way. No country in Europe would ever dream of doing that. It would rather kind of talk its way out of it.
Or wait for the heat to do it.
Sorry?
Or wait for the heat to do it.
Or wait for the heat to do it. And with China, I think that I've found myself influenced by this yin yang kind of ontology, hugely. And it's an intrinsic part of kind of this Chinese thinking. You know, and the thing you notice about the yin yang thing is not just as the dark and the white and the light and in this spiral, but in the middle of each of those is a drop of the opposite.
Yeah.
It's this recognition that actually it's not just about, you know, the environment and capitalism, but a recognition that in the middle of your capitalist thinking is the environment, and in the middle of the environment is a drop of that capitalist thinking. And you can apply that whichever way you want. And actually, it is so much in there. And when I have the opportunity to speak with young Chinese people, they are amongst the most concerned about the environment from a genuine way.
And I would offer one more thing, right? The Chinese culture is one where we are thinking about the next generation actually very seriously. We do want a better life for our children and our grandchildren. And we will make sacrifices now, right, for the well-being of our kids and their kids. Right. So this is actually a very core central part of the Chinese culture. And I think where the environment is concerned, this only helps it, right? And that's why that attitude, the very serious attitude towards the environment, I don't know. I mean, I'll venture to say the Chinese may very well be the most serious about it.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, Kenny. You know, this thing about the next generation, because certainly my parents' generation, my uncles and relatives like that, their life is always about their children.
Yours is not?
Well, mine are, you know, they look after themselves, sort themselves out.
No, but you have made sacrifices when they were younger.
Yeah. And but the thing is, it's not there's something different about it. It's about the fact that actually this is what it's about, as opposed to I make sacrifices and I wish I could just go for a drink. It's actually recognizing that this is what it's about. I think that's the essence I want to sort of bring out there.
Yeah.
I think there's a kind of a sliding scale from west to east in terms of the length of term of the parenting contract. Because I think from a Western perspective, it's like you're 16, it's almost time to leave the house. And whereas I think in the Eastern perspective, is like you're almost 56. It's about time you made your own mind up.
Or it's about time you provided the house that we can live in.
Yeah, so I think we've been living very much on the yin side of things. So we're going to get to yang in a while. So before we do that, let's finish off this little part of the yin aspect of things, because the world's fiery reality awaits after this. Tell us something, a story about China. It doesn't have to be funny, but just something that's just truly uniquely China. It just couldn't happen anywhere else. The sort of thing that we want to try to give the audience for a conversation at a dinner party.
No, I'll share this story, right? That happened in 2015. That actually ignited my curiosity quite formally into Chinese mindset. So I had a side hustle when I was still working with Club Med. So I signed rights to toy photography. So I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but there are a lot of people, millions of people who collect action figures and collectibles. And then the most talented of them take pictures of their collectibles. So very naturally, you would have very artistic and creative people creating very beautiful images out of this. So in 2015, I organized an exhibition. I signed the rights to 32 such photographers from around the world. And then I staged an exhibition under the theme of Star Wars. So this was basically pictures using Star Wars action figures or collectibles to the point that they could be seen as wall art. Right? So I did the exhibition and sold this limited edition wall art as a side hustle. So the exhibition on its opening weekend went very well. And then apparently people were very impressed. They've never seen an art form like this before. And started to post on social media, on WeChat and Weibo. Star Wars at that time happened to have just been acquired by Disney. And then Disney's corporate headquarters was in Shanghai. So president of Disney started receiving messages from his friends congratulating him on a very wonderful exhibition. And then on Monday morning, right? So I opened the exhibition on a Friday, and then the weekend happened. On Monday morning at 10:45, I received a phone call from the licensing manager from the Disney office, who told me that at 10:45 they have already had a senior management meeting, and that the legal team now is putting up a case against me for infringing on Disney's copyright, right? But this is derivative art, right? And I never once tried to mislead anyone into thinking this was a Disney event. But anyway, so I mean, I was of course worried. This is Disney after all, right? I called a few friends to try and find out how big a legal team they had. So they had in Shanghai alone something like 25 lawyers. So I think for the rest of the afternoon, whenever I closed my eyes, I saw 25 lawyers working overtime, putting up a case against me. On that night, I made 2 phone calls, right? I called a Singaporean friend. And then I told him, Disney might be suing me. So my Singaporean friend very seriously asked me a question, like, do you want me to come up to Shanghai to help you? I said, help me with what? Help you tear down the exhibition. Right? If you cancel the exhibition, things should be right? Then Disney won't have a problem. And then I rang a local friend, and I told him the same thing. Like, Disney is going to sue me. This guy, in 2 seconds, told me, "Congratulations, bro! You're rich. You're gonna get rich." So that's the Chinese friend telling me that, hey, if Disney sues you, it's going to take at least 3 or 4 years. We'll drag it out as long as we can. During this time, you should take your exhibition and tour all the cities in China, shouting that this is the exhibition Disney doesn't want you to see, right? And that really, I mean, this is true story, my true story, right? And it was what made me realize, right, that mindset actually makes all the difference, right? So my Singaporean friend was thinking of getting out of trouble. And then my Chinese friend was thinking of the opportunities that came from this. So I got absolutely curious, right, into wanting to be like that. I wanted to have a mindset that was like this, to see opportunities instead of retreat, right? When things like this happen to me. That's why I started observing and studying the mindset.
You've left the conclusion out of this as well. What did you do?
No, I had a meeting with Disney. They retreated actually. So I mean, they didn't even bring their lawyers into the picture, and then said to work together, because what I did was derivative art. It was very hard actually for them to. But that's the thing, you see, all the licensing business is about deterrence. Now, most of the time, I mean, a lot of the cases that a license owner wins, or rather settles, right? Most of the time people settle. They decide to cease and desist. They don't go and fight this because they don't have that kind of firepower, right? The financial firepower to fight Disney. That's how they win, right? That's just the world.
Is IP? I mean, this is something I wanted to talk about as well. But is IP itself something that is a little bit different in China? Because I mean, you know, you think about the core concept of communism, for instance, right? So IP itself is sort of almost anti-communist, right? The idea you should have no real way to say that you can't do this because I have it. So
it's a very complicated. Yeah, it's a very complicated construct. Well, I personally feel that the Chinese have a certain. So just to give an example, right? When they were the chip factory to the world, and everybody came to them, what did we expect? We expect them to just, okay, be the laborer and produce and be at the lowest end of the entire value chain for how long? I feel that there is a certain understanding in the Chinese psyche that everything has a kind of reasonable exchange. Like if you invent something, it is right of you to benefit from it, to profit from it, but it should not be indefinitely, especially if this something is good for the community, right? And actually that is the concept of patents, right? So if you apply for a patent, it's usually valid for a certain number of years. No patents is indefinitely valid. So inherent in this is actually the idea that good things, things that are good for mankind, for civilization, should not be privately owned forever, right? So if it's all patents actually last something like 30 years, if I remember, 30 years, then after that it's actually open, free property that people can, right? So I don't think society should accept the concept that somebody can benefit and solely benefit from something that they came up with indefinitely. So I think there is that balance there. But there's also this very interesting case. I don't know if you guys know this. Louis Vuitton just sued Molly Tea for using that jasmine flower emblem, right? And then won. This was in a Chinese court. So I think China is also, of course, finding its way, right? And trying to come to some kind of a balance on how they understand these things and how they deal with it, right? But yeah, I mean, for a very long time, China never had any brands, right? So if you wanted a suit, it's the Mao suit. If you wanted a radio, the radio came because it's all produced by the state. So there was no concept of branding. The very first branded item in China, make a guess, what product was it?
I think it's called the Little Red Book.
No, but the first product with a foreign brand in China was the Marlboro cigarettes. That was a very, very first thing. And again, this was told to me by someone who lived it. So it's sometimes very easy for us to forget just how quickly they have moved from that to where they are today, right? So when you come across someone who is in his, for example, his 50s or even, I don't know, mid-40s, many of these Chinese people now who are very successful, very wealthy, actually remember days when they didn't have enough to eat, when they didn't have much at home. I mean, it's very easy for us to forget that, but a lot of these things are actually living memory. It's not history lesson. It's living memory in their brains. They remember days when hardship was the norm, when they didn't have enough meat. You had a kilogram or half a kilograms of meat for the family a month, right? And then you rationed it, right? It would do us well to remember that a lot of these people actually came off a life that they still remember that was very different. And then again, so this mindset, right, that they have and their worldviews and their values, of course, will be different from us.
Yeah. Kenny, we want to thank you for being with us. We're going to move on to the next part of the show. But for everyone, this is Kenny Lim, known as the China Whisperer, with his framework China Decoded, where he helps boards and C-suites understand how Chinese companies think.
Chinamaxxing.
Chinamaxxing. Chinamax. Yes,
But he's going to
Chinamax responsibly.
But he's going to stay with us. So I actually found it interesting in Singapore that people sort of older 50s and upwards remember childhoods in kampongs. So the memory's here too. But the other thing is that came out, I think it was this week, was a Pew survey that basically China is now beating the US in popularity, significantly beating it. apart from India, which is kind of interesting. And there's a couple of interesting pieces going around about Midea. I think that's how you say it. It's an air conditioning company who basically dispatched 20,000 air conditioners into France in the middle of the heat wave. They made them within 3.5 days and got them to France within 7 days. So, and for a lot of Europeans, it's the first Chinese product they own, and they're very impressed with the quality of the product and all this sort of stuff. So it's an interesting time. And obviously for those of us out here in Asia who get other media, we definitely have a different sense of China and what's going on. And you see it through a cultural lens as well. So it's an interesting one. All right, just want to quickly get onto the news. We know that there's explosive diarrhea spreading across the United States. And
explosive diarrhea.
Yeah, and if you're in the American military, you can now do a screening for testosterone levels if you're over 30, and you can get some boosters if you need it. But of course, one of the concerns that's coming through is that it potentially could mean that female combat soldiers, it could be part of pushing them out of those roles, which I personally find so frustrating, because as a female in the military in Australia, I was in the early days of women sort of moving into all of the roles, and it was really, really difficult. So to go backwards on this and eventually at some point go forwards again, it's just it just breaks my heart.
May I just say that the US, if they keep on going with this particular thing, they will have the baldest military in history.
Baldest.
Yeah, because one of the leading causes of balding is actually male pattern balding anyway. Is testosterone. It's actually the high level of testosterone in your body that keep going, and that's actually what makes the hair fall out of your head.
All right, so I'm surrounded by testosterone.
I want to add that. I'd like to be quoted one day in history and go like, Joe Augustine said this would happen as the shiny military of the West walks past.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's happening, of course, is all those looks maxes, in particular Clavicular, has made himself sterile because he's injecting so much testosterone. A passenger on a Ryanair plane was almost sucked out of the window this week, which was like, whoa. And now there's a new term which I hadn't heard before. Apparently, it's not new, but it's a term called male lesbians, which seems like a bit of a contradiction, but it's not. So I'm around Gen Z kids, and we talk a lot about this sort of stuff because they're so open to sexual sort of states of being. They're just, it's, you know, when I think about when we were kids and what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable, and you know, the shame attached to being gay or being lesbian or anything, this generation of kids got nothing. They got no problems with anything. You can be whatever you want to be. They just don't care. Anyway, male lesbians, I'll put it in the weekend reads because I actually find it really interesting. And of course, we started with the wildfire coverage that came out of Canada, but the smoke's now descended right across the states. They think it'll clear for the World Cup finals. But what I wanted to do before we start to talk about death is, Richard, you went here last week. There's a lot of stuff going on in the economy, and before we got on, you were talking about what's going on. Do you want to just give us a quick update on what you're seeing from an economy perspective?
Yeah, I think we're still dealing with kind of a dichotomy that a lot of numbers in the world are coming in very strong. But there is, in my opinion, an incredible amount of weakness below the surface. And if you look at what markets have been doing up till maybe last week, the tide that lifted all the boats was effectively the AI trade. And every company involved in a meaningful way in that chain has made enormous gains over the last couple of years. And it's now kind of starting to crack. We had an incredibly poor overnight session in Asia where Taiwan got hit extremely hard on the day after that Taiwan Semiconductor reported their results, and they were not bad. But I think you always reach a point of saturation when all the people who wanted to be part of this theme and be invested are probably now invested. The valuations are extremely high because they are painting an extraordinarily rosy picture of the future and what the world can become. but there is no one left to buy into that picture anymore because everyone is now invested. On top of that, you have an extraordinary amount of leverage in the system. There was an article out saying that margin buying, where effectively you borrow against the stock you're buying, is at the highest level ever in the US and has eclipsed sort of the tech bubble 25 years ago. Those are signs of extraordinarily frothy conditions where people are consistently refusing to look at any negatives and are only blindly following the bullish narrative. And it seldom ends well, you know. The South Korean index, the Kospi, made gains of almost 100% last year in dollars. And the won is largely a stable currency anyway, so it's not like you have a currency effect. And this year, in the first 6 months, it advanced another 100%.
Oh.
Now, those are kind of stock market gains that we've only ever seen 2 or 3 times in modern times. We saw it in the US in the late 90s, and we saw it in Japan in the late 80s. And none of those periods ended particularly well for those stock markets. So there are many pieces of the puzzle out there that tells me that you are in the midst of this perfect storm now, when valuations are extraordinarily high and everyone who kind of liked the narrative is invested. So who is going to come and take me out of my position from here?
What about the resumption of war with Iran? How's that playing out? Yeah,
I'm sure it's kind of the spark, or, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back, because crude prices have bounced $10-15. The US is in the middle of its driving season, and the effect on fuel is much, much higher in the US than elsewhere in the world because they have much lower taxes. So the pass-through is progressively much bigger. It's going to affect the US consumer considerably, and you will see it, no doubt, in confidence numbers coming here over the next couple of weeks, that when fuel prices do this in the US, the consumer is not very happy, and it's going to affect spending. And it poses a huge dilemma to the central banks, who probably kind of felt, oh, the conflict is over, crude prices are coming down, we're not seeing the pass-through into the inflation that we might have feared just a month ago. You now back up against the ropes, taking it full throttle, because now you're going to print some very, very ugly inflation numbers over the next month or two. And it will be hard for the central banks not to hike, because they have no credibility left.
All right, let's bring us back here to talk about death. But so, time frame to crash. Any predictions?
October is always a nasty month. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's what I said last week. David thinks it's August. I said October last week.
Yeah, I think August is always bad. But I think I mean, I'm not sure it's going to crash. But anyway, it's you know, this thing, who's going to buy in next? You'd be surprised. And I think there's so much bad news already out, and everybody's shaking it and ignoring it.
My read of this is that there's just too much cash.
Yeah.
And if there's more quantitative easing coming, there's nowhere else for the cash to go. It can only go there. It's just all in this. I mean, it's in the hands of a few individuals, in the hands of a few people, right? And that is the only place they know.
Yeah. Although I was looking at Larry Ellison with Oracle and the amount of money that they've invested in it, and it's not. I wouldn't be sad if you lost it all. But anyway, it's
right. But I think that's right. And I think what it is actually, you know, in my mind, this crash comes when it's actually when the real economy and everything is completely connected with it. So it's not it. You know, unfortunately, it's going to be one hell of a crash when it happens. It's going to be like, it's going to make the 1920s, you know, the Great Depression look like a blip. in that way, because it's going to come on top of climate change, on top of 2 million people being evacuated in China, a million people displaced in Bangladesh, and those sort of things, and air quality in US being comparable to the air quality in cities in Asia, where Asia is having the worst air quality in the world, and it's going to come on top of all of those things. So it's going to come on the practical realization that actually AI isn't solving any of these problems. But at the moment, the sentiment is very much AI will solve all these problems. When you go to hear about people working in AI, when you look in the literature and stuff, it's like, when you look in the media and everything, it's about how AI is discovering all these things that will solve all these problems. I think that's a mood where people are always going to put some money in. I don't think
China has stopped, has disallowed retail investors from investing in the US.
Right.
Not letting the common people put money into the US anymore.
Protecting them.
I remember China had that 2015 crash. It was absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
And it was the property market that supported it, which was still okay at that time. And now the property market is somewhat in the doldrums, and it doesn't want what's going to happen if it gets this sort of irrational exuberance, if you like. But the thing about irrational exuberance is the party can go on for a long, long time.
All right, so I just want to talk about the week of death. Lindsay Graham was obviously the big breaking piece of news this week, and conspiracy theories have been going ape shit, basically. Anne Widdecombe in the US, who's obviously in the UK, who was a former Conservative and now part of Reform, was murdered. I don't know if there's any more information on that. The Sheikh in Qatar, who's really he sounds like almost the founding father of modern Qatar. He seems like a bit of a Lee Kuan Yew. He passed. And of course, Sam Neill died. And if I was going to die, I hope people talk about me the way they talked about Sam Neill. Would you agree? It's been quite good. It was sad. As an Australian, it was really sad because he was part of our lives long before he got onto the international stage. So for most of us, we almost grew up with him. So I found it incredibly sad. But the person who isn't dead is Mitch McConnell.
No. He's just back.
Well, apparently there's a photo, and then there's more conspiracy theories about it being doctored, and it was a photo taken all these years ago. And anyway,
it's very Politburo, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, no one trusts anything in the US anymore. Even within MAGA circles, they don't trust anything. Laura Luna's going nuts.
What a change, from sort of like, this is what you expect out of the communications from the Soviet Union and China and places like that, to actually this is the communications you get out of the US.
We've come the full circle.
So we're seeing a lot. So I'll go back to featuring. I was trying to give everyone a break. I thought we could talk about death for a moment. But there's a lot of obviously going on from an environment perspective. Are you guys still hot where you are, David and Richard?
It's cooled a lot. It's still very dry, so that's still a problem. And of course, with the intensity of the heat, that meant that there's been a lot more water usage. So water is becoming a problem. So that's definitely the case. But I'm not sure whether this is low in the waves of the heat waves, or whether this is an actual kind of coming to an end of the heat waves. But it's been cooler yesterday and today. Still kind of, you go out, you take a walk, you're covered in sweat, but it doesn't feel like you can't get out at all.
But that's my life every day, David. Richard, how are you going over there in France? How is it? Nice and toasty?
Yeah, it was very warm when we arrived a couple of days ago, and it has cooled. Overnight was actually very, very pleasant. The temperature got down to like 14, 15 degrees, which is what it normally would do, and means this is an area of France where no one really has aircon. And I've never thought about using it when we stayed here in a hotel, and we don't have one at home, because the nights are cool enough that you cool down the house.
Yeah.
And you're kind of fine, but it was pretty warm, albeit it was actually warmer in June when we were here than now. Then it was deeply unpleasant.
Well, there'll be at least one hot night coming up when England meet France, and both sides will be very interesting.
I don't know. I think the thing is, nobody really wants to watch that game.
It is the saddest game in football, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the game that nobody wants to play. If you're a footballer,
What teams have normally done historically, which I think is kind of a nice touch, is that you effectively play the guys that haven't had a lot of pitch time, and say, you were at the World Cup too, and the guys that were the pillars and have been used very heavily, basically get the day off, and that way everyone gets a run out in the tournament.
Yeah, it's played like a friendly.
Normally they can be very entertaining games, but they're not played with that huge undertone of real aggression, because it's kind of a fun game.
All right, so I want to keep us moving because we haven't got much time left, and I want to talk about. So obviously we were talking about the heat, and there's a lot of news and the fires across Europe as well as in the US and Canada, or the smoke's in the US, but the fires are in Canada. And of course, all of this drops brown carbon onto the ice in the Arctic, which means it melts faster. And but it also, this is something to remember, when there's a lot of smoke in the atmosphere, it can also change the weather patterns in our favor. So a lot of the information that's coming out now, the scientists are always finishing with, but it's not certain. And it's this sort of stuff that adds the uncertainties. But there is one prediction, and it's from Sheikh Hausvater, who I would consider, for me, is quite conservative as a climate scientist. And he published a piece called "The Strongest El Niño Ever." And basically, it's based on 14 seasonal models and 667 ensemble runs, and it's pointing to a 90% chance that the 2026 to 2027 El Niño will be the strongest ever observed, and it's going to potentially peak near 3.6 degrees Celsius above its baseline of 3.4. The previous record was 2.75. Right, so this is significant. I want to show you one image from the research, which shows you how off the charts this extreme heat or event is going to be, and obviously for different regions it's going to have different impacts. But for us out here in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, this is heat. For places like China, they get a lot of rain. So the region across the world, there'll be different impacts based on what the El Niño impacts are. But then there was also this other report as well, just to give you a sense of it's growing. So this is by July, it's already running extremely hot. So yeah, the prediction for this one is not looking good. But yeah, go.
I think what's interesting about that last chart you have, if you bring it back up. Yeah. Is that this is it before the El Niño? So people.
It started. It started in June.
It started but if you look at this down about where your June is, you're way over.
Yeah.
The point is this year has been on that uptrend, ticking way over before that switch over.
Yeah.
So you've got all that heat about to be burped up. Along with it. So I think I find that really kind of, well, I'm not sure if interesting is quite the word, but kind of like sobering, thought-provoking, whatever term you want to use, superlative.
Yeah, we can say
No,
interesting, but you have to twirl your mustache at the same time.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree. There's you can look at this information intellectually and be fascinated by it, even though when you look at this information, it's also incredibly alarming and therefore emotional. But you can do both, you know, and that's the only way you can really keep your sanity at this time, right? But the fact that he's pointed it out as being a concern is very concerning, right? And so, what are the risks? What does this mean? So, drought, crop disruption, wildfire, extreme heat, coral bleaching, flooding in some regions, and of course, a further jump in global temperatures. And as we've said, if you look at the trajectory, typically temperatures come down after an El Niño, but they don't ever go back down to where they used to be. So, and then there's another piece in the Guardian. Super El Niño could cause global food price shock lasting into 2028. And basically what they're sort of saying is, and so we're already having conversations at home about stocking up on some items because this is coming. I don't think you have to do it right now, but I think you need to be prepared. So the sort of products that you should be thinking about: rice, wheat, sugar, corn, soya, palm oil, coffee, and cocoa. And you know, like a lot of chocolate at the moment doesn't have cocoa in it anymore, but they're putting palm oil in it. So, and then both cocoa and palm oil are on the list. So your chocolate could be out. So they're looking at global agricultural output could fall by 14.3%, core commodity prices rising 10 to 50%, and the most exposed crops could potentially be 50 to 100% plus. So this is that article. So basically the risks are for the next 2 to 3 years. The models are converging. It's going to be a record by a strong margin. 2027 will be the year when it really has the biggest impact, especially with heat. And it's going to be going through the supply chains all the way through to 2028. Did anyone have a chance to have a look at that, think about it? Anyone want to comment?
Well, the main thing I thought about it, and this is just not that I'm a trader in that particular field, but I just thought this is the trade. This is the big trade of the next few years. If you can position yourself for it. I mean, this is the part where you might have an icky feeling about the way you did it, but it's one of those things where the world notoriously underplays the impact of it. And I think the shock is going to be pretty strong when it finally happens. It'll come in phases as well. It won't be just one big huge swash of it, but it'll be something like a day when suddenly, you know, Taco Bell is out of tacos. You know, that sort of a thing, which will be an indicator that causes a bit of ripple through the market, and then it begins to be a convincing story. Because right now, as much as the scientific evidence says it's much more than, I mean, they're still calling it a forecast and not a prediction, but it's pretty strong. It's pretty, the odds are on, right? If I were to put money on this as a World Cup bet, I'm betting on famine, right? So this is the thing that which is why as a long play in the market, it would make sense to me.
Well, it's you know, what happens is you so in terms of what that bet means, right, is that the people with the money, the countries with the money, is going to buy the stuff that people without the money won't have. That's what it is. And the people without the money is going to disappear off the news. And so the people with the money is not going to see it. And the stock market is going to keep on its level. But the economy actually depends on the people without the money, like, you know, people in Bangladesh and Pakistan and so on. And they're going to find that the economy is going to take a point or two kind of lacking growth as a result. But it's not enough to kind of get everybody panicking about it, because central bank is going to pump out a little bit more cash and try and support it all in that way. And so this is going to be the situation we're going to have as we go forward over the next few years, decade or so. China, incidentally, has over a year's worth of grain as stores for its consumption. The rest of the world, the total world, has about 3 months. So if China is 1/5 of the population, and the rest, and it has 1 whole year, and the rest of the world has a quarter of a year. That leaves something like 1/20th of the year for the rest of the world. That's less than a month. So
you might have moved Kenny's retirement plans up a few months.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of, and China is in that situation exactly as Kenny explained. It does not ever want to be in that situation again. It's not doing it because it thinks, it needs to hoard it for the rest of the world, but it actually sees that it needs to be able to stand, it needs to be able to cope, it has its people to manage, it has an obligation to its population. Its government actually feels that as its mandate. The Chinese government actually feels that it has a mandate to its population, not just to its voters. There's a big difference between the two.
Mm.
Yeah, and you take care of your people, there's also less chance of revolution, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Which is, for me, always the ultimate Chinese aim. It's kind of social stability is very much top of the list. And it means they're going to pursue policies that conform to that long-term vision.
Yeah. Kenny, do you want to say something? Yeah? Did you want to say
food
something?
sufficiency? No, I also recently wrote a post, right? I think it was two weeks or last week, when the Chinese some agricultural university just discovered a new yield, or they just improved their rice yield. They were able to grow grain in the middle of the desert, and they have found a way to do so. And produce better yield, double the yield of all the previous technology. So they're not just hoarding; they're also doing the R&D necessary to make sure that they can grow grain, right, in the harshest of conditions.
Yeah, I wonder what temperature maximum that will grow at. But I worry for countries like the Philippines, right, who import like something like 90% of their food from China, right? So if there's going to be a crunch, China's going to keep the food for its people, and then countries like the Philippines, who are not investing in taking care of their farmers, they're going to find themselves in a lot of trouble. But there's another one, climate freefall. One of the biggest risks to our economies is yet to be recognised, and so we're finding more and more finally of the media as sort of bringing together the El Niño and the war story, the fertilizer story. And finally, because it's just like, for God's sake, how can you not put the two stories together? You can't just tell one side of this story, but it's not looking good. So for me, for our family, I'm in Singapore. I know the government will take care of its people, but we are stocking up on we're stocking up on rice, which is hard to stock up on in the tropics. I'm going to get a case of coffee beans because I can't live without my coffee. I'm also going to get enough sugar to last us a couple of years. I'm just keeping an eye on things. But if there's something you can do now, because while the food's available now, and not at a higher cost if you can afford to do it. Of course, a lot of people can't afford to do it. But is anyone sort of going to do anything for the next couple of years to sort of get themselves prepared?
I'm growing more food.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kenny's description of the Chinese is really useful, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, where's the opportunity for me? And this is not necessarily commercial opportunity. I'm looking at an opportunity for me to, improve myself as a person, to understand what it is. I'm not going to be able to have everything. What do I want not to have, and so on. So I think we are often very, very much thinking, this is the comfort zone we're used to. We have these things in here. How can I keep them in here? And that sets up this kind of approach towards something like climate change, as trying to say, how can I build a seawall here? How can I kind of build a water tank there and do all those things? Ultimately, climate change is just nature taking back over. It's saying, you humans have controlled the planet for that time. It's about time you kind of step aside.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think in that sort of context, everything that worries you is something that I look at and think, interesting. I'm interested to see why I'm worried about that. What does that mean about how I've been? Is that something I really should worry about, or should just forget about it and just get on with something else? I think that's kind of a different view to saying, and I do, think I need to grow more things. I've been experimenting with growing things and all that way. I'm beginning to feel I've got kind of greenish fingers as a result. But that's come from not so much trying desperately to grow enough so that I can eat, but actually it's allowed myself to be a lot more experimental, a lot more open to what I can do, and I feel less kind of fearful that I can't do anything.
So, all right. Anyone else? Anyone want to jump in quickly? No. All right. I wanna ask. So we had what was the name from the Catholic Church, Laudato Si?
Lorna
what's her
Go?
name? Yep. We had Lorna on last year, and she was amazing. And of course, she's still doing incredible work. But the Church of England went to had a vote this week on whether or not it should rewild 30% of its land, and it owns an extraordinary amount of what is it? So if it rewilded 30%, that's 42,500 hectares, and it chose not to do it. And I'm so shocked by that. What did you guys, you in the UK, think?
I mean, interestingly, I think the Church of England is still kind of suffering from the episode with Wonga, this payday lender, this basically loan shark lender that it had invested in without realizing it had invested in. So it's taking on since a very kind of cautious role in everything. Should it rewild? I think there are different degrees of rewilding that can sort of says it can be useful or whatever. But the fact is, you can rewild all the churchyards.
Yeah, exactly.
And turn them into ecology lessons and actually make money out of it if you want to. But maybe that's just too Chinese a way of doing this.
No,
they
should.
It's a shame.
Yeah. No, it's disappointing. And with King Charles at the head, still the head of the church, right? And he's such a greenie, you'd sort of think it would have happened. But yeah, so there's lots of other things that I put in the agenda that for us to cover. Obviously, we've got whatever's going to happen with Iran. We've got so Trump obviously flew back from Turkey in the old Air Force One, making a claim that the new Air Force One was going to the UK so that the British American troops could see this new plane. And then it turns out there was not enough security on the plane, and there was an Iranian assassination attempt that the Israelis had told the Americans about, and now these 4 journalists from the New York Times have been subpoenaed, trying to work out who got that information. It's like, it's all good fun. He also, if Trump is assassinated, he set up a plan for bombs to go off all over Iran as a form of revenge, but I don't know if Vance is going to necessarily follow through on that. And there's a really funny one in the Borrowitz report, which is tight, and that's obviously satire. Trump says his funeral will draw a much bigger crowd than Ayatollah's, and the line I liked was, "Every day people say to me, 'Sir, I can't wait for that day to come.'" I thought that was kind of good. All right, but what else is in the news that you guys have been sort of that's got your attention or that you read? Who's up?
I think onto China. So China's just formally objected to the British government taking over that British steel company, which is kind of Chinese owned, and I think that's quite interesting.
What was that? China's objected to British company taking
so
over.
Britain has a kind of fading steel industry, and the steel company that China had taken over, and they're taken over. They were going to turn it around. They're going to change the way in which it makes steel. It's going to make green steel and so on. And part of that is going to close its blast furnace down, and it's going to go moving forward. and it had asked the British government initially for some, few hundred million subsidy towards that whole plan. That never came about. Over time, the Chinese company said, look, we're going to have to shut down some operations here, a lot of operations here. The British government objected to that. The whole thing cost something like $1 to $1.5 million a day of loss to keep it running. The British government then kind of took it over and partially took it over kind of thing, said, you guys got it, you can't just walk away, you got to keep it running. That's gone on for a while until I think it was yesterday or earlier or the day before, when the British government said, look, we are taking over ownership to protect the jobs. And the Chinese company has objected to basically a confiscation of their ownership by the British state in that way. They're just taking over it. For me, it's interesting to see a situation where actually the Chinese company is now sort of, is quite confident in coming forward and sort of says you can't do that. That's part of his confidence that Kenny has expressed. 20 years ago, he wouldn't have been able to have that confidence, but now it quite definitely has it and says you cannot do this. The stupidity on the British government side is that this is going to cost the British government, $1.5 million a day in doing so. And in trying to sustain a charcoal-based a coal-based blast furnace making steel that nobody wants.
The Chinese are actually facing this in quite a number of places. You know what happened in Panama?
Yeah.
And there was something in northern Australia as well. There was the port or something. Yeah.
And recently as well in Indonesia. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like the Chinese are probably going to coordinate, a response. They have to make sure that like none of these companies are going to give in.
Yeah.
And there's going to be state support behind it.
Do you know what's happening in Indonesia?
Indonesia had a similar case in the mining industry where the government wanted to basically they saw an opportunity to make it so difficult for the Chinese to retreat from the market, thinking that they could take over the entire mine, right, when the Chinese withdraw. And then what the Chinese did, which made everybody's jaw drop, was that they dismantled the entire mine within 3 weeks and then shipped it all out of Indonesia. So they left no machine, no facilities whatsoever. It's making quite a it's quite a shock actually to the local government. And then Panama is landing actually today, right? The government is sending a delegation to Beijing to try and redeem themselves. So the meetings are happening today and tomorrow.
Okay.
That's very interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'll bring up. Sorry, who was that?
And Panama is also interesting because, again, with the El Niño thing, they've started reducing the maximum draft of the ships that can go through, or the maximum load effectively that they can carry on through. And I suspect that's going to repeat what happened a few years earlier, when the price of a crossing went to $3 million, when normally it's about 100,000. As a result, not only was it you can't carry as much, but just the slot itself is costing so much. So I think in terms of when the stock market crash, all these things will need to eat into the economy from the opposite side to the kind of irrational exuberance and the expansion. And what you have is you have government standing in the middle trying to support it all. So that's why I think when it goes, it's going to be horrible. But it just doesn't feel like people really are really talking about the fact that they can't really support it or whatever it is.
All right, so I'm just going to bring everyone. Wait a minute, my mouse isn't working. Bring us all back up, as it's our last show for the season. Rather than doing what's keeping you distracted, I wanted to ask everyone it's a hard time, and some of us cope better than others. Some people aren't coping at all. That's why mental health is on the agenda for pretty much every government in the world. They know it's a problem, and they know it's going to get worse. So before we finish the show, and I don't know when we're going to be back, but who wants to start? I mean, I'm looking at the screen. Maybe we just start with David. Ideas, advice, recommendations, just for people in the coming weeks, months, even years. Mindset, behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. My 6-step program, the Thrive Academy, it's kind of like how you end up relying yourself, referring yourself. I think I had a conversation with a guy who is a Nepalese civil engineer, and he's very much into what's called the Vastu, which is a kind of a Hindu equivalent of Feng Shui. About the same time, kind of like 5,000 years or so, and a lot of spirituality in it, but it's much more of a spiritual approach, much more in that way. Yeah. And he said when he started learning about it, he learned about a principle of thirds, basically. And you think about how you do things and how you succeed. And he says, in this, 1/3 is spiritual, is your spirituality. 1/3 is luck, and 1/3 is what you do. It's quite interesting. Because since the Enlightenment, we've chucked the spiritual out. We haven't chucked it out, we've just kind of ignored it because it's always there in that sense. With the luck part, our kind of advances in science technology has kind of pushed it away so that we think we can manage it. So we make our own effort from 1/3 into close to, at least over 50% to close to 2/3 in that way. So we think it's all up to our own effort, it's what we can do, and all that's how we succeed. But what climate change is doing is throwing that 1/3 of the luck out the window in terms of our ability to control it. And actually what it's revealing is that luck is not luck, it's nature. It's a question whether we control nature or nature controls us, and it's coming back. So we need this spiritual side to work with us. And that's the spiritual side that says when we look at something that worries us, let's just connect to it spiritually as well. Because with that, we're going to be able to find the best place for our effort so that we can actually get back to something like 2/3 in terms of whether we're able to progress ahead. And nature is going to throw things at us, whichever way it does. That's what the El Niño and things along with it. And if we're able to blend that spiritual side back with the nature, we're going to be able to move along with it better. We're going to use that to see where the real opportunities are. And that's what that 6-step program is really about, thriving at nature's pace. And the way to do that is come together as the Thrive Academy. That's my shout.
All right. Richard, I know you've got to jump off. I think spirituality is a massive part of the story. Richard, do you want to quickly say what you need to say before you need to go?
Yeah, I think David is describing super important, and we're both extreme fans of experimenting. And I think each and every one of us will, over the course of the next couple of years, need to find new ways of doing things, because the old system is crumbling, and what you got used to will no longer be there to serve you and provide for you, because we're running out of money. So it will be down to each and every one of us to find new ways of supplementing income, growing stuff that you will not find in the supermarket anymore, and finding new ways how to do things. It's like, it's how evolution happens. We try new things, and what works we stick with, and what doesn't work we discard. And I think it's going to be falling on each and every one of us to do a lot more of that as we forge new ways to cope with what nature is throwing at us, because nature's going to throw a lot. It's going to get seriously ugly here.
Yeah. All right, Joe. I know you got to jump off, Richard. So.
Yeah. So of late, I've been doing quite a bit of training with high-level executives, and I've noticed first of all, when I meet them, I realize that they're quite enlightened in terms of their perspective and mindset. And at the same time, I've been surprised at how hard it is for them as enlightened as they are, to actually inhabit the mind of somebody else, the person who's not them, because it's many times it's just so obvious how things should be done, how things are right, how things should make a sense, that it's very hard to be just outside of their heads. So my little challenge to other people is to try to figure out the arguments for other people and spend that time. It's heavy on the mind to try to form somebody else's thoughts while you're holding on to your own, and it's a challenging thing, but that's the invitation that I have. Try to find the other person's perspective, find the other person's argument, and even try to make the argument for them, because it sometimes I find that most things just don't make sense because you don't try to figure it out. But if you can actually literally put yourself in their shoes and see their perspective, certain things make a lot more sense, and then you can then be more empathetic. So I think what happens is when you don't see any way around it, when it just makes complete sense to you and everything else is nonsense, then you can't approach it, right? So I think that's something of a challenge. I think I would like to recommend. They'll cause you a bit of a headache and perhaps some good results.
Oh, that's so that's the way we live, right? Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry, I just realized I have to run because I've got a dentist appointment. I've got a tooth that's broken. My teeth
I'm gonna have to rush too. So
all right.
If I'm just going to
we're
take
shrinking it here into it, but
you're gonna miss.
Thank you so much for coming, Kenny.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you. Really remarkable kind of conversation. Very much.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was really good. All right, Kenny, I'm going to ask you. What's your advice?
I have no advice. I'm learning about. I didn't know that this was something that's taken very seriously. Right, people are preparing for some kind of So I was thinking from a point of view of how the Chinese prepares themselves. So I was thinking, I should be training myself to need less calories, train our body to be able to survive on less. Isn't that something we should be looking at as well?
Yeah.
Right.
I think no, and that's a really interesting insight, because I talk to a lot of people about this stuff, and they're not thinking about it. They're really not. And if you're not thinking, the
China mindset is different.
Yeah, but it's gonna come. It's gonna hit us like a tornado. The impacts of this, and no one's gonna get away, right? Like even wealthy people will pay higher prices, right? So it's coming, and heat. For the poorest people, especially in Asia. I used to live in Thailand. I'm just thinking the people living under tin roofs, right? The heat has already been shockingly bad in the last 3 years. The last El Niño, but this prediction that's coming up, and the governments aren't going to do what they need to do to get ready. They're just not. And water shortages because of water evaporation, food inflation, or just not even being available. Heat. It's pretty frightening.
I think we do have to bring forward the plans to be living in China.
Yeah, well, they're gonna.
I mean, if any country can deal with this, I think China has as good a chance as any. It's better chance than any.
All right. So mine is so my greatest concern is that once people really start to come to terms with what is actually happening in the world from an environment perspective, as well as geopolitics, because all of this comes together, and then authoritarianism is a higher risk. So it all comes together. That's why it's the polycrisis, right? And so my great concern is that the world gets overwhelmed with despair, and when people are overwhelmed with despair, they can't do anything, right? So the important thing is, if you don't want to dig into the details because you don't want to go into the despair, listen to the people who've spent the years understanding it. And there's lots of people around the world who've spent years and years and years. They've gone through the despair. They've survived it. They've come out the other side, and they're trying to warn the world, right? So listen to what they say and what they recommend, and just move into action. So I'm going to share it because this is the Overshoot Challenge, which I launched a few weeks ago. There's more than 300 actions. You can just start doing something differently. And it's 12 different sections. It's politics, it's community, it's how you eat, how you dress, all that sort of stuff. You know, I was having a conversation on LinkedIn the other day. I'm wearing my clothes to the point they're falling apart these days. And I just sent a whole bunch off to get repaired just the other day, because I'm just wearing them in the house and no one's here apart from my husband and my kids, you know, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just doing my bit. I'm doing everything I can, obviously. I'm just trying to reduce my impact. And that's all any of us can do. And if we're in a democratic country, we can also influence change by voting. The other thing is really focus on your community, building your community, your local community. Community in heat waves, that's how people survive. So in all ways, community is going to be important. And just a little bit of fun, you know, especially since the war with Iran started and there's a nuclear risk, that, you know, all that sort of stuff. When things are really bad, I usually come down in the morning and the first thing I say to Steve is, everyone still alive? Because you know, we can't control a lot of what's going on, but there's no point worrying about it. And it really sort of gets you, it really puts you in the moment and you're living in the moment. And we're too much in the past or too much in the future, but actually being in the moment, you know, being in the garden, looking at the butterflies, really appreciating and valuing nature, but really ground yourself in the moments and beautiful moments in your life. And I find this helps me a lot. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
I would like to just say, first of all, I'm going to not lie and tell you I still haven't downloaded the Overshoot Challenge.
No, I know. I can see who has,
and I
by the way.
will, and I won't hear the end of it until I do. I want to encourage you to do something, and I think what happens is we get frozen in this thing of not doing anything because we can't do much about it, right? So recently, someone sent me a little petition that was basically to petition the Prime Minister of Singapore about a particular development. I think the development of land,
and forest,
just to make it keep it more environmental, right? And I got to say, back in the day, I probably wouldn't have done much with that. And I don't feel like I should have done very much with that. But just doing something like signing a petition like that and opting for your name to be public so people can see that you signed the petition.
Yeah.
I think those kinds of things also help. And you know, the doing of something. I mean, like what I like about what you've done with the Overshoot Challenge is that it's not perfect, but it's something. You're actually putting it out in the world for it to have an impact, rather than just to stay on the other side and go like, I want to get it right and make sure it's okay every 100% before anything gets done at all. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to look at. Just move forward, move in the right direction. Just take steps in the right direction. Don't just stay still.
Yeah. Are you saying my app's not perfect, or I'm encouraging imperfect action? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Or both.
As I gave you some feedback on the other stuff that I saw. But anyway, Kenny, thank you very much for hanging out with us, as everybody else as well who's still on the live stream.
Yeah.
No, it has been a pleasure. I hope to do this more.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back. Definitely. No, it's been really great. Really, it's really interesting just hearing the China perspective. Is so many people, especially from Western countries, and conversations I have, people outside of Asia, they just don't get it. They don't get it at all. So it's just so valuable, really is. And I think we all have admiration and respect for China, the three of us, and because it's well earned and it's time. And the Western media narrative frustrates the hell out of me because I think it misses a lot.
But I think we have a lot to look forward to, right? I mean, that example I gave, right? This lens at the moment is just because on the other side there's no light. But when the light does turn on, everything will change like this instantaneously. So it's not going to take another 10, 20 years, right, for people to wake up to the truth. It's going to happen like this.
Yeah, I think it's happening already. I think the aircon experience in Europe, just that, that experience, the first experience with the Chinese product, which is a positive experience, not just because it's cooling, but because it's well built, it looks beautiful, it works in the home, so those sort of things makes a massive difference. And that story, I didn't know the detail of that social media story. That was fascinating. I remember it happening, but I didn't.
Go check it out. You're gonna be moved. Li Hua letters.
Yeah, and that's when we all know, like when you bring just different cultures, different people from different backgrounds together, and they communicate and they talk, that's where change happens. So it's a positive example of social media, right? Yeah. Anyway, we've had. Oh, sorry,
thank you so much.
We've had lots of comments. Someone just, what's that? You always look good. Oh, my husband's just said, you always look gorgeous, my love, whatever state your clothes are in. And that is absolutely untrue. But we had lots of people commenting and joining us today, and a lot of them were your connections, Kenny. So thanks for that. And we'll see you guys August, September. I don't know. We haven't agreed on when we'll come back, but just thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.